First, Scott and Barbara, thank you. Y'all really did. That was just like an Oscar presentation. That was beautiful. We genuinely appreciate that, and genuinely appreciate the introduction, and Terry and the entire team for the leadership here. My heart is genuinely filled with the work that you all do. Before I begin, I just wanted to make a special acknowledgement of Ivan and Andrea, and also the 6 graduates. Y'all are awesome. I mean, if you don't need a better illustration of why we're here, so the first time I actually ever stepped foot in this state was actually when I was stationed at Fort Lewis, and so I had the chance to come and see the beautiful state of Washington out there. And I have to say, having to follow Ivan and Andrea and the 6 graduates in the military, that's what we call an ambush. So whoever set up the schedule, I really appreciate that. Because again, you know, as we saw and as their stories illustrated, this is why this work matters. Because what this work does, this work provides opportunity for many people who didn't even know that that opportunity was even there. This work is essentially a sense of light. And it provides a new pathway and a new level of guidance to those who need and deserve a champion. You know, I really do, you know, I think about my hometown, and even coming out here, there's actually a lot of similarities between what you'll see here in the Pacific Northwest and what we have in Baltimore. You know, in addition to, like, you know, great seafood and football teams that are pretty good, even though yours is actually better than ours. But it's also, these are also all places that have a real sense of pride in the place that we call home. We know the places that we call home are not perfect, but we know we'll fight for them because it's that important and because it's that necessary. And I also know when I think about my city and the city of Baltimore, we're a city that's been in the news a lot recently. We're a city that just a year ago, we had the entire international media community descend upon our city as we watched buildings, as we watched businesses, as we watched homes burn. And I bring that up because we're now, last Tuesday was the year anniversary of what many in Baltimore now call the unrest of 2015. And I think a lot about what happened that day and what happened around that incident, because we're now also to the point where when everything happened a year ago with Freddie Gray and his arrest and eventually him dying a week later, and that led to this whole series of unrest that took place in Baltimore, which eventually led to April 27th and that night that no Baltimorean will forget. But the interesting thing is there's a common question I get from a lot of Baltimoreans and even from a lot of people not from Baltimore who will ask and they'll say to me, so what do you think is going to happen to the city? Because the police officers are now all on trial right now. So people will ask, they'll say, what do you think is going to happen to the city if there's no convictions? What's going to happen to the city if there's acquittals across the board for the officers? And I say, you know what, I guess that's an important question, but I think there's a more important question that we're not asking. And the more important question we're not asking is, what happens if we as a city are just sitting around and waiting to figure out if there are convictions or not? As if that alone is going to solve all of our issues. When I think back about that incident that happened a year ago, and people look at that video of Freddie Gray being arrested and put inside the van, I ask people, when you take a look at that video again, don't look at Freddie Gray. And don't even look at the officers. Look at everything else. Look at the neighborhood where that video was shot. Look at the community. Look at the fact that that video was shot at 9:17 in the morning and how many people are just standing around. Not on the way to work, not on the way to school, just standing there. Because if you don't understand the macro, it will be impossible for you to understand the micro. If we don't understand And just like the work of goodwill, be willing to roll our sleeves up and actually do something to provide not just jobs, but hope to people. We're going to have a very difficult time understanding anything else that's going on around us. That's why this organization matters. And that's why your being here matters. It's because you're putting your flag in the sand. And you're saying, I'm willing to fight for all of the others out there. You know, when I first wrote The Other Wes Moore, I didn't understand the way the publishing industry worked. So I didn't realize at that point when I was writing it that when you pick up a book and you walk into a bookstore, you pick up a book, every book that you open, when you open up the book and you flip through the pages, everything you see on the inside of a book, that is what the author wanted to share with the world. Those are the author's words, that's the author's intent, that's what the author wanted people to understand, right? Everything you see on the outside of a book, the cover, the title, the airbrushed author photos, the blurbs, all that kind of stuff that you see, right? That is what the publisher wants to share with the world. The publisher will legally hold on to those rights for a reason. And the reason they will hold on to those rights is because the publisher knows that is their only chance to market. So the publisher will make the author feel like they're part of the process, but frankly, the decision has already been made before the author even has a say, right? I did not know that. I thought publishers genuinely cared about what I thought. So they call me in to this room. This is about 6 months before the book was set to come out. Up until that point, it was just called Untitled by Wes Moore, right? Or so I thought. I walk into this room. There's a big oak table. They had all the marketing people around there. And they're like, Wes, what do you think the title of your book should be? And I'm like, you know what? I'm really glad y'all asked me because there's like 6 titles that I really like. And they're like, great, what are they? I was like, okay, what about Baltimore Suns? Or what about All the Difference? Or what about Out of Many? Or what about End of the Innocence? Or what about Life After Death? And I started throwing these different titles out. And I looked at them and I said, so you can choose between any of those 6 titles because I'm good with any of them. And they looked at me, they said, that's very kind of you. But we think we have a better idea. And they said, what do you think about The Other Wes Moore? And I said, that might be the dumbest book title that I've ever heard in my life. And they said, what don't you like about it? I said, there's a whole bunch of things I don't like about it, but let me go ahead and start with 3. Okay? The first thing I told them I didn't like about it was I tried to make it very clear that this story wasn't just about these 2 kids. It wasn't just about one street. It wasn't just about one neighborhood. It wasn't about one city or one demographic or one race or one socioeconomic group. It's about all of us. It's about the decisions that we make and tantamount to that, the people who we have in our lives who are helping us to make those decisions. So by putting the name inside of the title of the book, are you not completely negating that entire fact, right? That's one. Second thing I told them I like about it. What self-respected author do you know that puts their own name inside of a title of a book that they've written, right? The other J.K. Rowling, the other Stephen King, the other James Baldwin, the other, I mean, it sounds ridiculous. And then the third thing I told them I like about it, I said, listen, guys, no one knows who one Wes Moore is. So why does anybody care who the other Wes Moore is? And so I said this to them, and they smiled, and they was like, those are actually all really good points. And they said, the problem, though, is that you're missing the point. Because you're absolutely right. It is not about you. And it's not about him. The name is completely irrelevant. You can throw any name inside of that book title. It really does not matter because the truth is there are Wes Moores that exist in every one of our communities and in every one of our homes. People who are one decision away from going in one direction or going in a completely different direction. People who every day are straddling this line of greatness, and the problem is they don't even know it. The most important thing about the title is not the name. The most important thing about the title is the other. The fact that our society is full of others. People who might not look like us, people who might not speak like us, people who might live on the other side of town than us or another part of the country than us. people who might come from a different family lineage than us, but people whose destiny matters as much to the long-term safety and security and greatness of our communities as ours does. The others. That's who you all are fighting for. You're fighting for those who need and deserve that champion. And when I went through this process and as that sense of background, the day after Iris just received the Rhodes Scholarship that Scott and Barbara were talking about, the Baltimore Sun, which is my hometown paper, wrote an article about this local kid who just received this scholarship and how now I was getting ready to head overseas with these 31 other American students to go study overseas. And in the article, they talked a little bit about what the Rhodes Scholarship was, but they also talked a little bit about my background and my childhood. They talked about the fact that I only have 2 memories of my father, and the second memory that I have of my father was when I was 4 years old, and I watched him die in front of me. They talked about the fact that my mother, who unexpectedly and instantaneously now became a widow with 3 kids who she was going to raise on her own, had a really difficult time, and then eventually moved us to go live with her grandparents because she couldn't do it. And then I went to go live with my grandparents up in New York, and almost immediately as I got up to New York to go live with my grandparents, I found myself getting very lost. To the point that I was picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school and which ones weren't. Hurting people that actually did love me so I could impress people that could care less about me. And by the time I was 11 years old was the first time that I felt handcuffs on my wrists. At 11. And when I was 13, I found out that when my mom makes threats, that she's not playing. Because she'd been threatening with this idea of military school ever since I was 8 years old. And she would always say, if you don't get it together, I'm going to send you to military school. And I'd say, all right, Mommy, I can see you're upset and I'm going to work harder. And then when I was 9 years old, she started giving me brochures to show me she wasn't playing around. So I look at the brochures. I'm like, all right, Mommy, I can see you're serious. I'm going to work harder. And when I was 10, 11, 12, threats kept coming. I kept on blowing her off. And finally, when I was 13, she said, you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to send you to military school. And I looked at her and I said, Mommy, I can see I'm hurting you. And I'm going to work harder. And she's like, nah, you're going next week. And she then packed my stuff up, sent me away. And I was letting anyone know who would listen to me when I first got there that there's no point in you wasting your time on me because I'm not staying, right? They had these big black gates that surrounded the school, and they would always yell at us and say, if you don't like it here, there's a train station, you can go home anytime you want. And so every time they would turn their backs, I would just take them up on their offer and then run out of the gates and run to try to find the train station. The problem was the school's in the middle of the woods, and I kept on getting lost. So one time after day 4, and I'd run away 5 times already at this point, I'm in my room with my roommate. My squad leader walks into the room. We stand at attention, and he says to my roommate, he says, get out. I got to talk to Moore. And my roommate grabs his stuff, and he runs out of the room, and I'm standing at attention, and I'm thinking to myself, this is not good. Because whatever's about to happen next, he doesn't want witnesses. So I'm just standing there at attention, and I'm just waiting to find out what he's going to say or do to me. And he tells me to sit down, and I grab a chair, and he grabs my roommate's chair, and he sits down next to me. And he says, listen, Moore, it's obvious you don't want to be here. And quite honestly, we really don't want you here either. So I've actually drawn you a map on how to get to the train station. It's a true story. So he literally reaches in his pocket and pulls out this map. And this map had like a legend and a pace count and landmarks. I mean, it was like dude just handed me a lottery ticket. And seriously, there are tears welling up in my eyes. And I'm like, listen, I'll never forget you. You know, when you get out, let me know. We'll grab lunch. I mean, I'm so excited just to get out of this place. And he's just like, just get out of there. So that night I planned this whole big Great Escape where I set my alarm for 11:30 because I knew TAPS, which is lights out, was at 10 p.m. And Reveille, which is this crazy wake-up call with like welcome to the jungle and flashing lights and all that kind of stuff, was at 5:30 every morning. So I'm like, all right, set my alarm for 11:30 because people should be asleep by then, but it still gives me a good head start. Alarm goes off. I grab a little bag that had like a change of clothes and a granola bar and a flashlight and my map. I said goodbye to my roommate, and I ran out of the gates. And I'm following this map to a T where it's saying, all right, you're gonna go 20 paces, you'll see a big tree, you'll make a left. So I go 20 paces and I see a big tree and I make a left. Go 30 paces, you see a big rock, you make a right. I do all that. But the thing is, I'm passing hundreds of big trees and big rocks the whole way. I'm in the middle of the woods. And the only thing I know about the woods at that time of my life is I know, like in horror movies, this is where folks go and don't come out of, right? Because all I know are cities. And so I'm following this map and I'm just going deeper and deeper and deeper into the woods. And then eventually, I just sit down and I start crying. Because not only am I scared, I also feel like I'm trying to tell people what I need, but nobody's listening to me. And I don't know how to say it anymore. And eventually I start hearing leaves rustling, and I thought it was just, bears and tigers, whatever's in the suburbs of Philadelphia that were chasing me today. And then I start hearing laughter. And I look back, and I found my whole chain of command who'd follow me out, because the map was fake. The map took me to the middle of the woods. They just enjoyed watching me do circles in the middle of the woods, and they just wanted to see how bad I wanted to go home. And that night, they got their answer, that I was really ready to go home. And so they brought me back to campus, and we're in the middle of plebe system, so there's no outside communication, no phone call, radio, television, nothing. You're either going to succeed as a team or you will fail as a team, and the choice is completely yours. And but they said, we're going to make an exception, so they said, Moore, you have 5 minutes to make a phone call. Call who you want. And I called the only number that I knew, which was my mom. I'm 13 years old, I'm calling my mom, and my mom is freaking out because it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. She's like, are you okay? I'm like, Mommy, I'm great. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity, but I'm really ready to come home. Can you come get me tomorrow morning? Do you need directions? I mean, I'm going through this whole litany of things that she needed to do to make my life easier. And that's when she stopped me. And she said, too many people have sacrificed in order for you to be there. And too many people are rooting for you. And you've got to understand it is not all about you. And I listened to her talk. And after 5 minutes, they told me my time was up. And I gave them back the phone. And they hung up the phone. And I'd be lying if I said anything changed that night, because it didn't. I went to bed that night just as angry as I went to bed the night before. And I woke up the next morning even angrier. But eventually I began to understand what she was talking about. This idea that the only way that I was going to make it was if my friends were there to push me, and the only way that they were going to make it was if I was there to push them. That we lived in a completely interconnected society. And so oftentimes when people will say, well, isn't it wonderful that you got sent away? And that's probably what changed everything, when the fact you got, sent away to a military school. My answer to that is very quick, and where the answer is, that's not what did anything. Me getting picked up and moved around did absolutely nothing for me, because I know people where the answer that people thought was the right answer, well, let's just move them from one environment to another environment. But if the services aren't in place, then all you're doing is compounding a problem. What happened to me wasn't the fact that I was physically transported. What happened to me was the fact that I found myself surrounded by people. Starting with my mom and my grandparents, but eventually leading to this amazing string of role models and mentors and teachers and dream makers. People who helped me to understand that the world is bigger than what was just directly in front of me. People who helped me to understand that we live in a big and a beautiful and a bright world, and that I actually had a place in it. People who helped me to understand that there was never going to be any single accident of birth, not being black, not being poor, not being from the Bronx, not being from Baltimore, and not being fatherless, that was ever going to define me or that was ever going to limit me. And so in essence, what they did was they taught me what it meant to be free. That's what you all do. You don't just provide job skills. You don't just provide employment opportunities. You provide freedom. A freedom to dream and know that your dreams won't be laughed at. A freedom to have hope and know that your hopes are actually going to be supported by someone else. A freedom to know that you belong in every single room that you're in, no matter what room that is. That, in essence, is what made all the difference. And that wasn't about my physical location. It was about the people who surrounded me in every physical location. You know, I had a colonel in military school. This guy he was one of the adults who was in charge. He was the commandant of cadets. This place wasn't completely like Lord of the Flies. You know, there were some adults who had some responsibility at this place. But he was a 3-time Vietnam veteran. And he was as tough as nails. My plea brothers and I used to laugh. Say, I think we only saw him smile once. And I think it was an accident when we saw him smile. But he loved us. He was tough, but he was fair. And we loved him right back. His name was Colonel Billy G. Murphy. And he was losing weight really quickly. And one day he called the entire Corps of Cadets together. And he told us that he had to leave the school. And the reason he told us that he had to leave the school was because he was diagnosed with cancer. And Colonel Murphy gave this speech, which in essence turned out to be his farewell address. And as we all sat inside the pews and Colonel Murphy stood up in the pulpit, he gave a talk to us that I will never forget. Because he said to us, when it's time for you to leave here, whether it's time for you to leave this school, whether it's time for you to leave your job, whether it's time for you to leave your neighborhood, or when it's time for you to leave this planet, make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. Make sure that it mattered that you were ever even here. Because none of us are promised anything. We're not promised more days or more weeks or more years. No one has ever tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know what, Wes, you've got 6,515 days left so you can pace yourself. And nobody ever will. And I'm actually okay with that. So the only thing that we know is that while we're here, let's actually do something with it. While we're here, let's push. While we're here, let's fight. While we're here, let's sacrifice. While we're here, let's find people. And let's go be a champion. Let's go be a dream maker. Because it's those kind of interactions that will give people who might not have had a sense of direction in their life prior. People like me. And let us know that there's a place for us here too. I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you all have done. I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you all are doing. And I'm incredibly grateful that you're spending your time and your efforts and your energies fighting for the others. It means more than you possibly can know. God bless you guys for all you do, and thank you so much for everything. Thank you so much.